rise and join in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call. Councilwoman Barnum.
Here.
Councilwoman Hushler-Ray.
Here.
Councilman Perticone.
Here.
Councilman Sealy.
Present, Madam Clerk.
Supervisor Bello.
Here.
Attorney for the town. Thank you.
That's me.
There's some feedback going on back there.
It's if you have a phone too close to the. Okay.
7:35.
Okay.
We're now going to have the public hearing upon the matter of request to adopt the 2016 budget.
Can I have a motion to open the public hearing?
Moved.
In a
Second.
second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Hearing is open. We had one speaker signed up to speak tonight, and that's Mr. Jeff Goldblatt. If you'd like to come forward. Thanks.
Good evening, Jeff Goldblatt, 128 Parkside Crescent. This is my 24th budget presentation. As in the past, without interruptions, I will move this as quickly as I can. And also, as in the past, and for purposes of clarity, I may mention certain companies by name. I do not have any financial arrangement or any employment arrangement with any such firm, although it would be nice, it would help me pay my taxes. I'll begin this year with code enforcement. I really should not have to bother those good folks telling them that there's electronics at the curb. This is a matter of New York State law that is not being very well promoted and needs to be on our town website and through other media. Electronics can't go to the curb. You have to take those either to the Eco Park facility on number 10 Avion Drive. The Salvation Army will pull this equipment reluctantly. Best Buy stores will take this stuff as well. But code enforcement really shouldn't be bothered with things like this. As a matter of fact, and it was just a matter of dumb luck, while cleaning up a mess on Briarwood Drive, I happened to have, by pure chance, have an impromptu conversation with the new county executive and pointed out to her that the messaging on Eco Park was not getting through. Yes, the county water authority was sending out those little cards, but if you pay your bill online or if you rent, which was the case with the situation on Briarwood Drive, you don't get to see those little cards. Any additional way that the town can drive this messaging forward is helpful, especially as Monroe County has now made a 60% diversion commitment to the state of New York that has to be achieved within 10 years. And to give you some idea of how behind Monroe County is, Onondaga County, the Syracuse area, is already there. What code enforcement should be doing are two ancient issues that are still hanging out there. The first can provide a little bit of revenue to the town, and that's missing dumpster enclosures. I've now submitted 4 lists to the building department, and right now I have about 24 locations that are not in compliance with the code that was changed in 1995. There would be something worthwhile for them to do, because if I'm a property owner and I've remodeled or built or what have you and have done everything that the town code calls for, it's not fair to have somebody down the street not in compliance. So there's something that code enforcement can do. That's sales tax revenue and a little bit of building permit revenue potentially. The other is a public safety issue, and that involves house numbers. House numbers were made mandatory in 1991, 5 inches high, contrasting color with your house, not blocked by any shrubbery. And there are still plenty of houses that are still not in compliance with this. Here was an ad that was placed 20 years ago this month pointing this out, and it's still a problem. I really don't think the town of Arundecoit wants to open itself up to any legal ramifications if something bad were to happen. You don't want to have the news open up, tonight in Arundecoit, tragedy to report, let's go live to the scene. You don't want that. Emergency Services needs to see your house and see your house number. So there's a second project I'll suggest for the new year that would help the town of Arundecoit avoid liability down the road. Also, in terms of removing violations, most notably grass. While our guys certainly do a nice job, cutting the grass is not something that requires an awful lot of expertise. I've suggested this before, and it's worth suggesting again, that grass cutting, whether it's on properties that have been left unkempt, places like this, be bid out. The town of Penfield, in my pile someplace, I have their bid. They do this as a matter of regular course. Again, this is not a matter of who does or doesn't do a good job meeting. It's a budget meeting and how our tax dollars are being spent. See if there's a way that there could be some savings prudently by bidding grass cutting work out. The guys who are doing that work can certainly be reassigned to other duties. Building maintenance, the same issue. Again, the guys who take care of this building, the other buildings, they certainly do a fine job. The question is, can we get the same level of service, maybe even an enhanced level of service, for less money? Currently, this is costing the town about $500,000. It's a lot of money. Sweep the floors, vacuum the carpets, things of that nature. Maybe there's a way that it can be done separately. I know other public entities like Regional Transit has bid this work out for their headquarters, and I'm sure other places have done the same. See if there's a savings that can be had in this regard as well. Solid waste. Unlike the leaf bag situation, which is how this all began back in the day, people like me are still subsidizing other people's yard work. Now, you definitely want to have everything looking nice in town, and I know this is a little difficult to see from a distance, but when someone puts a huge pile like this at the curb and expects the town of Arundecoit to pick it up, at my expense and others, it's really not fair. Now, your Public Works Department knows approximately year over year what the approximate tonnage is that's being picked up outside of a storm situation under normal weather conditions. So why not place a user fee on to help defray some of the cost? If you're generating this material on your property under normal weather circumstances, other people shouldn't have to pay for it. Now, if somebody wants to help me out, my address once again, no, I'm just kidding. The haulers. Now, while the commercial and residential haulers are accounted for, there's been an open question off and on over the years about what to do with the roll-off only firms. Now, Arundecoit is one of 4 towns that license, and I've checked with them. Everybody does things a little bit differently. But there are, between the guys who work on roof repairs, estate sales, things of that nature, something like a dozen firms that are operating in town. If I'm a licensed hauler, and there's somebody competing against me down the street that isn't licensed into the town of Arundecoit, not terribly fair. Now, I'm one that doesn't believe in the heavy-handed of government. However, this year, just in the town of Pittsford, licensing was proven to be a good thing, which they don't have. When residents had to go to Channel 13 News to get their stuff picked up after the hauler that they were using, which was operating improperly here for a short time, suddenly went out of business. Town of Pittsford had no recourse because they don't license their haulers. Now, fortunately, we do, and while there have been some issues in the past, having that mechanism there to hold people accountable is certainly a positive thing. But the question remains, is everybody licensed, or are we only going to license some companies? In fact, to go a step further, just this year alone, there are at least 2 companies that are in clear violation of the code because they are not providing low-volume service residentially. There's also 2 more companies who are operating commercially that are putting out the exact same equipment when it comes to dumpsters without a name and phone number. Now, I submitted draft wording to the Commissioner's office earlier in the year, and that's yet to be acted on. That should have, in my opinion, already been brought before this board. In that particular instance, if a problem shows up, who does code enforcement call? Or who does the fire marshal call? Or who does IPD call? That needs to be taken care of. It's not a huge issue, but if we're going to license, then we need to be consistent across the board. I'm going to come back to Highway 3 in a moment. Highway 1 concerns roads. And this is an article that comes to us from the October 18th edition of the newspaper of record, which is the Buffalo News, at least for me. Upstate calls for parity on road fixes. I sure hope that when the new legislative session opens in January, that our representatives are aware that we need some parity in this town. Earlier this year, I had lunch with a manager from one of the disposal companies I'd not seen for a while, called and said, "Hey, I haven't seen you for a while, let's have some lunch." I usually don't eat lunch, in a desperate attempt to try to keep my figure, but okay, as long as it's soup, that'll be fine. And as we're driving along, this gentleman says to me, "By the way, is it me, or are your roads beat up?" I said, "No, it's really not you." And I said, and not to pat myself on the back by any means, I said, "I'm the one who keeps sending postcards into Public Works, listing out the potholes that I see so they can be taken care of. But no, it's not just you, and I sure hope your big trucks can handle this." Yeah, they can handle it, and then he threatened me to give me a ride in the back of one of them, but that's a different story. The point is, not every single road can be repaved every year. The commissioner, I'm sure, has talked with you about that. But some additional help to get more of it done, which is not new by any means, would certainly be helpful. Also, and my bad, there's a firm in Buffalo called Unique Paving Materials, and they were running a test in Cattaraugus County with a new mixture that works better than cold patch when it comes to the issue of potholes. It's been a difficult year for me for a number of reasons, and so Jeff, the secretary, didn't get the stuff in here fast enough. My hope is that I will have that information into the commissioner next week, and is something to look at. It may cost a little bit more up front, depending, but as far as repeated visits to visit repeated potholes, it could cut that cost down a little bit. This is a firm that's been in business for over 60 years, and they claim that what they've come up with, which doesn't have a name of any kind, works a lot better. So I'll have that hopefully next week. There's also an entity called Forrester University, which is aligned with the Solid Waste Association of North America, of which I am a member. And they had an interesting seminar, and I will pass this information along to the commissioner as well, from a gentleman by the name of David Hine, who is an engineer and principal paving engineer and vice president at a company called Applied Research Associates, using wastes and byproducts in road construction. Now, I know that typically our roads are milled and resurfaced with the same material that's been brought up, but this is another approach which could have some potential savings down the road. Again, I will have that information into the commissioner next week. There's also an entity that you see in the coupons that come to your house called Concrete Solutions, where they lift up and repair broken sidewalks. Now, the guys that do the work are fine, but oftentimes it's just a matter of the tree roots pushing up the concrete, not necessarily the concrete being split. Maybe we ought to give them a test someplace to see if their process works and if there's any savings as far as our sidewalks are concerned. Because a number of them, especially with the older trees in town, are starting to buckle up sidewalks. For those of us who bike and walk a lot, it is an issue. And again, it's a liability thing down the road. If someone trips and falls, guess who gets a phone call? I was going to go through Highway 3 and talk about trucks, but there's a building problem. And that leads me into a discussion of the building next door. Some people here will may not find this comfortable to listen to, but it has to be said. And I'll explain why. And as Dana Lash says on the Blaze TV, I will bring this tugboat in. To be clear, we definitely had to upgrade our library facilities. No argument about that. They were old, not enough room for things, perfectly understandable. Now, first of all, I want to compliment the supervisor for being one of the only people to come out and publicly tell most of the truth about this. And this comes from a DNC piece written September 23rd of this year. I quote the supervisor. From the beginning, we said if we were spending all this money just to buy a place to store books, that wouldn't work. This had to be much more of a community center, much more of an area where people could come, hang out, play board games, come study, come find a quiet place to meet your neighbors, come with your kids in the children's section and have something to do. Close quote. I got a library folder that's about 2 inches thick, and boy, I really wish those words had been said a little while ago. That's most of the truth. The rest of the truth was getting the Ridge Road property back on the tax rolls. This I've known for years. That's been the goal for years. And that's fine, but what I see next door, it's a perfectly fine building, but it's a bridge too far. I'll explain. And then I'll explain why this ties in with highway. A couple of features. For example, when all we heard about was books and books and books. We need more room for books. We're throwing out books. Okay. 1,500 square feet plus or minus for a computer lab. Now, a little more room than what you had before, certainly understandable. But when I find out that the building is Wi-Fi compatible, that sends up a red flag. Just within the last couple of days, thanks to USA Today, I then read these couple of articles. Study shows millennials and smartphones to go hand in hand. Americans seem to be folding many of the things they once did on task-specific devices into their smartphones. Even more stunning, that was on November 1st. On November 2nd, from USA. Kids going mobile at a much early age. This is quoting a study from the journal Pediatrics. This is kind of interesting. At age 4, the survey found 3/4 of the kids owned their own mobile device and about half multitasked, using more than one device at once. Other findings, 20% of 1-year-olds own their own tablet computer. 28% of 2-year-olds can navigate a mobile device with no help. 28% of parents said that they use a mobile device to put their children to sleep. What does this mean? Does it mean that books and magazines and newspapers are going to go away tomorrow and there was no need for that at all? Of course not. But what it means is that as your children and grandchildren age, the use of a building like that becomes less and less, to the point where before all the bonds are paid off, the odds are they'll have little use for a building like that at all. Again, it doesn't mean you don't do anything, but I believe we overreached. Could a new Arundequoit Senior Center, Reed Pine Grove, be integrated into the new library building? This is from the page 3 of the frequently asked questions. Not at this time, it says. Currently, and it goes on to describe that the library offers many services and programs, et cetera, et cetera. Well, when the supervisor says this was intended to be a community center, and this says not at this time, there's a conflict. Again, it certainly can be, but it's a question of what did we really want to build. Every single meeting that was in this room or at Kearney talked about the need for books, the need for more space for books, 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 and books. And now the mission seems to have changed. Doesn't square up. Then, also on page 3 of 10, will there be enough parking for the increased use, library programs, meeting room use, staff, combined with the current use of the town hall campus? Now, I, having been to planning board meetings going back to 1996 when this first came up, did what most planning board members should do, visit the site. I made 2 trips to count the parking spaces, and that's when we were talking about a 55,000 square foot building. I even have a witness to this, a very reliable witness, then Lieutenant and now Chief Tantillo. And I'll show you the exact spot in the parking lot where the conversation took place. He comes out and sees me, "Jeff, what are you up to now?" I said, "Well, I'm counting parking spaces because they want to put this 55,000 square foot building over here. Do you think there's enough room?" I said, "I don't know. It's kind of trying to put a lot onto a landlocked site." He then said, "Well, if need be, we can always give up the chief space." I said, "You said that, not me. I'm leaving. Goodbye." and he probably wouldn't like the idea nowadays. And people here were told repeatedly, don't worry about the parking, we've got this under control, it's all going to work. These are photos that were taken on October 26th, showing a jam-packed parking lot with traffic spilling out onto Titus Avenue. Now, granted, this isn't going to happen every day, but the idea that this was never going to happen at all is factually wrong. And that brings me to Public Works. The bonds on that building were paid off 4 years ago. I was sitting in this room and heard the commissioner talk about this. In my estimation, at that point in time, immediately at that point, that's when planning should have been started for a new Public Works building. Why? It may not have the sex appeal of a new library, but the difference is simple. Some people will use that building going forward. Most people rely upon that which is contained in the Public Works building. There isn't going to be any app anytime soon. You can't stand on the side of your house and go bink, 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 and the potholes get fixed. Bink, 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 the trees get trimmed. Bink, 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 the sidewalk gets fixed. But there are apps that cover everything in that building right now. You've got truck bodies that are rusting out on you right now that we've paid for with our tax dollars. Now, to be fair, the ones that I've seen are not as bad as the ones that a certain disposal company are sending in here 5 days a week that haven't seen paint in 15 years. Ours are not as bad as those, yet. Also, I could stand here and talk about how brush collection could be done more efficiently, since I always have to bring that up. But what's the point? There's no room. Furthermore, besides the fact that there is no room to have a proper wash station to get the road salt off that's eating away at your equipment bodies, or that there's no little space set up to do minor repairs, there's no place to put in a natural gas fueling island. Now, yes, at the moment, oil has crashed, but that's not always going to be the case. All you got to do is pick up the newspaper and read what's happening in the Middle East, even though we're not getting the most of it there. All you have to have is a situation where Abdul looks at the wrong way at Mohammed, and the guys in the Chicago Mercantile Exchange go berserk. And guess what happens to the price of oil? It's that volatile. Natural gas protects us from that. Also, it would represent a productivity improvement because in the bitter cold weather, as was explained to me last year, you've seen some of the trucks from Waste Management, some of them are natural gas, some aren't. And one of my buddies with that company on the road was telling me that the mechanics were going nuts because the fuel lines were freezing up on everything. Meanwhile, the natural gas truck, turn the engine, go load up. So not only in terms of long-term cost, but productivity, because we will get more bitterly cold winters, hopefully not this year. It makes it easier if our guys have to go out and clear streets. There's no place to put it because we're on a landlocked parcel. By getting that relocated first, then it opens up all kinds of possibilities for your library/community center in terms of the positioning of the building, having plenty of parking so it doesn't become an issue. It opens up all kinds of possibilities. But as it is now, in my estimation, we've basically painted ourselves into a corner. You've got a building, it's a nice enough looking building, but you have the back and the front and the back. I've seen 2 drugstore chains try to pull that with their buildings and they failed. Even the original version that was shown of this had the opening on the side, trees, a little courtyard, could have a little fountain maybe. Now, after spending hours in there perusing Proust or looking at whatever you're doing, now you walk out and what are you greeted with? A blank wall. Not terribly friendly looking, in my opinion. So that's why, in my opinion, doing Public Works first should have been what should have happened. And then when you layer on top of that, as far as the community center piece of all this, the town of Arundecoit, it's my understanding, plus or minus $750,000 was plowed into Pine Grove, which is also supposed to be a community center, or maybe it isn't anymore, who knows. The bottom line to all of this is simple. However well-meaning and well-intentioned all of this is, it was not well thought out. And it was not well thought out with our money. It may work up to a point, but I think we could have done better and at a lower cost. Whether it's your computer room with a clock that I could mount out on the thruway and people could tell the time as they're driving by, texting, sexting, or whatever they're doing behind the wheel. Even the bike rack over here. I'm an avid bicyclist. Would that offer me any protection whatsoever if it was pouring rain? I asked the guys who were doing the installation. They said, well, probably not, sir. We're just putting it up. Meanwhile, the city of Rochester was desperate to do something with the bus shelters on Main Street. We could have gotten one of those. Yeah, it would have had to have been cut down, retrofitted, repainted, trucked over here, placed. And before someone says, well, you're undermining your argument, no. A smaller and slightly less ostentatious building could have paid for that. This doesn't do anything. And I sure hope that V-shaped glass doesn't crack when we get a lot of heavy snow in the wintertime. I hope someone looked at that. I could go on, but you get the general idea. It may be nice, and it may have a lot of attention for a while. When the newness wears off, we'll see. Again, we had to do something, but as Harry Callahan once said, in a different context, it's a hell of a price to pay for being stylish. Lastly, let me talk about Seabreeze Water District and the cemetery. Those are nice things to have, but they're not core to day-to-day life in the town. In my view, the cemetery should be spun off. We've talked about Stonemore before, and let me remind you of that. This is a publicly held company that I have no interest in, that works with churches, other municipalities running funeral homes, and cemeteries. It's nice that we have our own cemetery, but given the economic climate that we're in, it's a luxury that I will suggest going forward is something that we really need to take a look at spinning off. These people do the marketing, the everything. And you have flexibility just reading through what they have. It can be a tuck-in acquisition for them. It can be a joint operating agreement, whatever. But at least invite their executives to come in, let them visit the town, see how nice it is, and then sit down in one of the countless meeting rooms next door and play Let's Make a Deal. The Seabreeze Water District, which as we all know has been a financial issue for a while. Now I find it difficult to believe that the Monroe County Water Authority would not entertain a tuck-in acquisition because it's all the same water that everybody else uses. No, there's no truth to the rumor that they found water on Mars and they shipped it down here to be used by the Seabreeze Water District. By the way, it would be interesting to know how much money was sunk into repainting the water tower. If a deal can't be done with the Monroe County Water Authority, let me suggest again, two publicly held firms that work with municipalities around the country to run their water systems, American Water and Aqua America. I think there may be a couple of others, but here's two to start. Again, while there may have been a rationale at one time for having that separate, given the fact that it already is the exact same water that the rest of us use in town, that's a lot of cost. In fact, without knocking everything over, just in terms of that alone, 2013, the total cost was $889,000, now going into next year, $939,000. That's just operating. The cemetery in 2013, just a little under $174,000. Now we're up to $227,000. The numbers aren't going in the right direction. So maybe it's time to take a hard look at doing these as well. In closing, and these are published figures in the budget, we're going into the 7th year of increasing costs without a tax increase, which for us is uncharted water, if you look through even before reval or since reval. If it never happened before, I would never question it. But it has happened before in this town. After 4 years of no tax increases in the face of rising costs, 1991, it all blew up, which started years, not months, years of unhappiness in this town. I was here the night the riot almost broke out, sitting right where that potted plant is. Some people have compared me to that, but that's a different story. Ask your police, they'll tell you. Thinking to myself, well, if this gets real bad, I can jump out that window there. That's when the room was turned the other way. And the shrubbery will break my fall. Or when budget hearings had to be held over at Eastridge High School because they couldn't fit everybody in this room. And we're now into year 7. What I've laid out this evening are little things and big things that can prudently, underline the word prudently, take some of the air out of the spending balloon. I even note in the supervisor's cover letter that one of the things that has some push on the budget is healthcare costs. That's funny. I thought they were supposed to go down. Oopsie. So while there is time and while there is, according to the supervisor's cover letter, a budget surplus, now is the time to start addressing these things, not when Ms. Seeley comes to you and says, Mr. Supervisor, well, I think we have a problem. Now is the time to act so that we do not go down that painful road a second time. I know none of you want to do that. Those of us on this side of the podium don't want to go down that road a second time either. And that's my message.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Goldblatt. Was there anybody else who would like to address the board tonight that did not have an opportunity to sign up? Seeing none, I'd call for a motion to close the public hearing. In a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Now pursuant to Public Officers Law, Section 105, 1F, I move we enter into executive session to discuss matters leading to the disciplining of a particular person. Can I have a second? And all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. I ask the board, and I'll grab a couple of department heads going to executive session real quick. Thanks. was a motion by Nicole, Barbara, and a second. Right.
To adjourn and reconvene.
Here, I'll ask for another motion to reconvene. All right, can I have a motion to reconvene in a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? And we are back in session.
Okay. Adopt a resolution authorizing disciplinary action.
Can I have a motion in a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Can I have a motion to adjourn? In a second? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.